My wife cheated with her boss, Rob, and now he's claiming ownership of the house and $300, $0 inheritance we never even received. How did I suddenly lose everything? I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. Honestly, my life felt pretty straightforward before all this chaos started. I was married to for about 6 years, and up until a few months ago, I genuinely believed we had a good thing going. She was always a little bitchy, sure, but I figured that was just her personality, sharp-tongued, quick to throw a snarky comment, but ultimately she loved me. Or so I thought. It all started with small things, missed calls, late nights at her office, a little more secretiveness than usual. She'd brush it off, call me paranoid or insecure, and I'd let it go because I didn't want to believe the worst. But then, things got weird. She started disappearing for hours, claiming she was working late, but I'd catch her in little lies. She'd say she was meeting a client or running errands, but I noticed she was wearing different clothes, more revealing ones, and her phone started acting strange, locked when she was in the bathroom, deleting messages like her life depended on it. One night, I came home early from work because I wasn't feeling great. As I unlocked the door, I noticed her car in the driveway, but the lights inside were off. That was odd because she usually kept the living room lamp on. I pushed the door open quietly, and I swear my stomach dropped when I saw her on our couch with her head in Rob's lap. Rob was her boss, a guy I'd always suspected she flirted with, but I had no proof until that moment. They weren't just talking, they were doing something else, intimate, close, and completely inappropriate. My heart stopped. I saw her look up, eyes wide with guilt, then quickly pull away. Rob looked up at me, smirked like he knew he'd caught me, and said, "Well, well, if it isn't the husband." His face was pale, her makeup smudged, her hair a mess. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. All those times I'd trusted her, all the plans we'd made about our future, gone in an instant. I wanted to scream, yell, do something, but I just stood there trembling. I couldn't believe it. My wife, the woman I'd loved and trusted, was cheating on me with her boss, and I had just walked in on them. The worst part, I didn't even know they'd been sleeping together. I had no idea she was sneaking around, lying every step of the way, hiding her affair under my nose. The betrayal cut so deep I thought I'd never recover. The anger, the hurt, the humiliation, it all flooded in so fast I couldn't process it. I felt like my entire world was crashing down around me. That's when I realized I needed to know just how long this had been going on, what she'd lied about, and how she'd managed to keep it hidden so well. Because this wasn't just about cheating, it was about trust, about everything I thought I knew about my life. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed up, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece everything together. I kept asking myself, how did it get this far? How did I miss all the signs? And more than anything, I wondered what I was going to do next. Because I knew this wasn't going to be easy to fix, or maybe it was. Impossible to fix it all. All I knew was that I couldn't just let this go, not without answers, not without some kind of justice. I had to find out what she was hiding, what she'd done, and how I was going to get my life back. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My mind was racing, replaying everything I saw the night before, her lying there, her face flushed, her eyes darting away when I entered. I couldn't shake the image of Rob smirking at me from the doorway. It was like I'd been punched in the stomach again and again. How long had this been going on? Did she think she could hide it forever? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do now? I didn't want to rush into anything. I needed a plan. I spent the whole day obsessively going over every detail, every moment I might have missed. I started digging through her phone, looking for clues, messages, anything that could tell me how deep this went. I found a string of texts between her and Rob, flirty, suggestive, outright inappropriate. They talked about meeting up after work, exchanging pictures, and even making plans to go on vacation together. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a fling, it was something serious. I also discovered that Rob had been giving her expensive gifts, designer handbags, jewelry, and paying for fancy dinners. She'd always told me she was just working late, but now I saw she was spending money like crazy. That's when I remembered the inheritance money we'd been told about but never received. It was supposed to be in our account, but it was gone. I thought it was strange, but I never thought it might be tied to her affair. That night I confronted her. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her I knew everything, the texts, the gifts, the nights she lied about. Her face twisted with anger and she started spinning stories, insisting I was paranoid, that Rob was just a work friend, and that I was overreacting. She called me crazy for even suspecting her, said I was imagining things, that I was insecure. I asked her why she was lying, why she was cheating, and she just shrugged, acting like it was no big deal. That's when I saw how cold she'd become. No remorse, no shame, just annoyance that I found out. The emotional blow hit me hard. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious. I'd always tried to be a good husband, worked hard, paid the bills, supported her dreams, and this is how she repaid me. With lies, sex with her boss, and a betrayal so deep I wondered if I'd ever recover. I kept asking myself, how could she do this? How did I let it get this far? I'd been blind and now I was paying the price. I thought about all the times she'd lied about where she was, all the money she spent, all the nights she was with Rob. It all added up to one thing: she'd been planning this, hiding her affair, and I'd been too stupid or too trusting to see it. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept going over everything. I was angry at her, yes, but I was also angry at myself. How I missed the signs, how I let her get away with it for so long. I started to realize that I needed to think about my options. I couldn't keep living like this, not with her lying and sneaking around. I had to decide whether I wanted to try fixing this mess or cut my losses and walk away. But deep down, I knew that trust was broken beyond repair. The betrayal was too raw, too personal. I felt like I was waking up in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. So, I made a decision. I was going to confront her again, but this time with a plan. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me with lies anymore. I was going to find out everything: how long she'd been cheating, what she'd done with Rob, and most importantly, what she'd taken from me financially. Because I had a sinking suspicion that Rob wasn't just after her. He was also after what we had: the house, the inheritance, everything I'd worked for. And I wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. The next few days turned into a whirlwind of planning and emotional chaos. I couldn't focus at work. My mind kept circling around what I'd uncovered. I started talking to a lawyer just to get a sense of what my rights were, especially about the house and the inheritance. The lawyer was straightforward. If Rob was claiming ownership of the house and the money, I'd need concrete evidence that I was the rightful owner, that the inheritance was legally under my name, and that she had no legal claim to it. That was the first step. Meanwhile, I kept digging into her finances. I pulled bank statements, credit card bills, anything that could give me a clearer picture of her dealings. It was shocking what I found. She'd been withdrawing money from joint accounts, making large cash payments to Rob, and even transferring some of the inheritance funds, money that was supposed to be ours, into secret accounts. I couldn't believe she'd been so blatant about it. I felt like a fool for trusting her, for thinking we had a stable marriage when she'd been secretly planning her escape with her boss. One night, I decided I needed to have a serious talk with her again. I was tired of her spinning lies, tired of pretending I didn't know what she'd done. I told her I had everything: proof of her affair, evidence of her financial manipulations, and that I wasn't going to let her get away with it. She started crying, but it was fake tears, I could tell. She kept insisting she didn't do anything wrong, that Rob was just a business associate, and that I was overreacting. She even called me jealous, said I was insecure and controlling. That just made me angrier. How could she be so brazen? How could she lie so effortlessly? I knew at that point I had to take action. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I started drafting a detailed list of everything I'd found: texts, bank transfers, gifts, her secret meetings with Rob, and I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer. I wanted to know what my options were, what I could do legally to protect myself and my assets. I also decided I needed to confront Rob directly, but carefully. I didn't want to tip him off, but I was determined to find out what his game was, what he thought he was entitled to. In the meantime, I reached out to a private investigator just to get some more clarity. I wanted to know if she'd been unfaithful for months or even longer. It turned out she'd been seeing Rob for over a year, maybe longer. They'd been sneaking around, planning to run away together, or at least that's what it looked like. She'd even talked about leaving me for him after the inheritance money came in. That was the final straw. I had been so blind, so trusting, and she'd been lying to my face the entire time. All of this was happening at once: legal advice, digging into her finances, gathering evidence, and trying to keep my emotions in check. I felt like I was unraveling, but I also knew I couldn't let her see how much she'd broken me. I had to be strategic. I knew she'd try to spin it, deny everything, or worse, try to manipulate the situation in her favor. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I was done being the husband. I was ready to fight for what was mine: my house, my inheritance, my dignity. And I was going to make sure she paid for what she'd done, even if it meant tearing everything apart to do it. The day I finally met with my lawyer was a turning point. Sitting across from him, I laid out everything I'd uncovered: her texts with Rob, the secret transfers, the missing inheritance funds, the gifts, the lies. His eyes narrowed as he took notes, and I could tell he was formulating a plan. He told me that I had a strong case to claim ownership of the house if I could prove it was in my name, and that the inheritance money, if it was legally mine, could be reclaimed. But the tricky part was Rob's claim. He was asserting ownership of the house and the money, claiming some kind of legal right based on a supposed agreement with. That's when I realized how deep this rabbit hole went. Rob wasn't just some guy I was sleeping with. He was actively trying to take everything I'd worked for. My mind spun with rage and disbelief. How could he be so bold? How could she? I kept thinking about the years I'd spent building our life, working late, paying the mortgage, saving up for the inheritance, all of it threatened by these two con artists. The lawyer emphasized that I needed hard evidence, proof of my ownership, proof that the inheritance was legally mine, and proof that was cheating. I handed him everything I had gathered. He also advised me to prepare for a potential court battle, because Rob might try to claim some sort of ownership based on fake agreements or even forged documents. I knew I'd need to be prepared for a fight, and I was ready to go all in. Meanwhile, I decided to confront Rob directly. I couldn't just sit back and let him think he could walk away with everything. I reached out to him, pretending to be calm but firm. I told him I knew what he was doing, that I had evidence, that I was hearing a lawyer, and that I wasn't going to let him steal my house or my inheritance. Rob's response was chilling. He laughed, told me I was just a jealous husband who was too insecure to handle the truth. He said was his woman now, and that he'd do whatever it took to claim what he thought was rightfully his. That call made things even clearer. Rob was arrogant, convinced he had the upper hand, but I wasn't backing down. I arranged for a formal legal notice to be sent to him, warning him to stay away from our property and to cease any attempts to claim ownership. I also started the process of filing a lawsuit to establish my rights. I knew this was going to get ugly, but I was determined to fight for what was mine. As I prepared for the legal battle, I also started planning how I was going to handle. I was furious, hurt, and feeling betrayed beyond words. But I knew I had to keep my composure, at least until I had everything in place. I reached out to a divorce attorney, just to get an idea of what I was facing if I decided to end things. The advice was clear. If she was cheating and trying to take my assets, I had every right to seek full custody of the house and a fair division of the inheritance. That made me feel a little stronger. I wasn't going down without a fight. In the midst of all this, I also started to realize how much I'd been caught in her web of lies. I'd been so blind, so trusting, that I didn't see the signs until it was too late. But now I saw everything crystal clear. Had been manipulating me, lying to my face, and scheming with Rob. And Rob, he was just a guy with no morals trying to steal everything I'd ever worked for. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I was prepared for a long legal battle, for her to try to manipulate the situation and for Rob to keep pushing. But I also knew one thing: I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I was going to fight for my house, my inheritance, and my dignity. I had to, because if I didn't, I'd be losing everything I'd built. And I wasn't ready to lose everything just yet. The legal process dragged on longer than I expected, and every day felt like a new assault on my sanity. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next piece of bad news or some new scheme or Rob might try to pull. I kept my focus on the evidence, proof that the house was in my name, documentation of the inheritance funds, and the mounting evidence of her affair. I also hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Rob's background. If he was going to claim ownership, I needed to know what kind of man I was dealing with. Meanwhile, his attitude shifted from defensive to outright hostile. She started accusing me of destroying her life, calling me jealous and paranoid. She told friends I was overreacting and blowing things out of proportion, but I knew better. I had the receipts, the texts, the bank statements. I had her own words, her lies, her betrayal, all laid out in black and white. The more I saw how little remorse she had. She was cold, calculated, and manipulative, trying to spin the story to make herself look like the victim. One night she confronted me in tears, claiming she was done with Rob and that she wanted to fix everything. She begged me to forgive her, swearing she'd never do it again. I looked at her and felt nothing but disgust. I told her she'd already broken whatever trust we had, that I didn't believe a word she said anymore. She yelled, called me a controlling asshole, and accused me of ruining her life. But I knew the truth. She'd ruined our marriage long before I found out. Rob was just the final nail in the coffin. The legal battle heated up. My lawyer filed the papers to reclaim ownership of the house, and we pushed to have Rob's claim dismissed. I learned that Rob had been trying to forge documents, claiming that had signed some agreement giving him rights to the property. Luckily, we had the real paperwork proving the house was in my name, and the inheritance was legally mine if I could prove it. I also started gathering witnesses, friends, family, who could testify to his behavior, her affair, and her financial manipulations. It was ugly, but I needed to build a solid case. The most shocking turn came when I discovered that had managed to transfer a significant portion of the inheritance money into an offshore account just before I started digging into her finances. I felt sick. She'd been planning her escape for months, maybe even years. It was like I'd been living with a stranger all along. Rob's claim was based on some vague partnership agreement she'd supposedly signed, but I had evidence that she'd forged it, trying to make it look legitimate. I knew I had the upper hand legally, but I also realized how deep her lies went. Throughout this ordeal, I experienced of emotions, anger, sadness, rage, and then a strange sense of clarity. I started to see the situation not just as a betrayal, but as a lesson. I trusted her blindly, and she'd taken advantage of that trust. I also learned that in situations like this, the truth always comes out, no matter how much someone tries to hide it. I felt a strange sense of relief, knowing that I was finally taking back control, fighting for what was rightfully mine. As I prepared for the final hearings, I knew I had to be strong. I couldn't let her manipulate the court, or let Rob's arrogance sway the outcome. I'd fought too hard, and I was determined to win. I didn't care how ugly it got. What mattered was that I was reclaiming my life, my home, and my inheritance. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. It was about my dignity, my future, and finally putting an end to the nightmare she'd created. I was ready to see this through to the end, no matter what it took. The final court date arrived sooner than I expected, and I was a bundle of nerves. Everything I'd uncovered, all the evidence I'd gathered, was laid out in front of the judge. I watched sit there, her face pale but trying to act composed, as if she hadn't been caught red-handed. Rob was there too, smirking like he'd already won. But I knew better. I had the truth on my side, and I was determined to see justice done. The hearing was intense. My lawyer presented the documentation, proof of ownership of the house, the forged agreement Rob claimed was real, and the evidence of the missing inheritance funds. We called witnesses, friends who saw sneaking around, financial experts who confirmed the transfer of money into offshore accounts, and the private investigator who, about Rob's background, tried to spin her lies, claiming she was manipulated, that she never intended to hurt me, but her words fell flat. Her entire story crumbled under the weight of the evidence. Rob's claim to the house and inheritance was dismissed outright. The judge ruled that I was the rightful owner, that the inheritance was legally mine, and that Rob had no standing to claim any part of it. As for, the court ordered her to pay back the stolen funds, and she was served with divorce papers immediately. Her attempt to manipulate the court and steal what I'd built was over. I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. Relief that I was finally free from her lies, but also a deep sadness for what I'd lost. Walking out of that courtroom, I knew my life was about to change forever. The house was mine again, and I had a clear path to rebuild. I also knew I'd need to work through the emotional fallout. Trust was broken, love was shattered, and the betrayal cut deep. But I was determined to move on. I started packing up our shared life, realizing that this chapter was truly over. In the weeks that followed, I filed for divorce and began the process of healing. I cut all contact with, blocked her from my life, and focused on myself. I learned that sometimes, the greatest act of strength is walking away from someone who no longer cares about you. I also realized how important it is to trust your instincts, to pay attention to the little signs, and never to ignore your gut feeling. Because once the trust is broken, it's almost impossible to fix. Looking back, I see this experience as a harsh lesson about betrayal, greed, and the importance of self-worth. I lost a lot: my marriage, some of my savings, my sense of security, but I gained clarity. I now know I am stronger than I thought, and I won't let anyone manipulate or betray me again. If there's one thing I want others to take away from this, it's to trust yourself, stay vigilant, and never let anyone steal your peace or your assets without a fight. Life's unpredictable, but in the end, standing up for yourself is the only way to truly move forward.